Okay, new plan, regroup. I liked all of this. It looks like ratty mohair. Is that mean? We've got a saga, guys.
I'm Nora, and this is also known as Nora Knits.
Hello there, I am Nora, and you're watching, also known as Nora Knits. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today, you guys. We're here with another episode of the Saturday Morning Podcast. So before I jump into all of my whips and those things, I figured I'd tell you what I'm wearing. It's been a little while since we just had something that wasn't a finished object, but was knitwear. If you've seen any of my videos before, there is a good chance that you've seen this sweater make an appearance. And especially if you found me through my Rhinebeck video, then you definitely will have seen this sweater. It is the Minto sweater by Magdalena Parker of Knitonomy. And it's just a really fun, oversized cable knit sweater. I will have all of the details to my Ravelry linked below, where I think I had a pretty detailed project information page. So you should be able to find all of my notes and things. But the verdict is that I absolutely adored knitting this as a first cable knit project. I found it to be very intuitive and easy to follow, and Magdalena Parker does a great job of laying out her patterns with all the information that you might need. So if you've never done a cable knit before, I do highly recommend her patterns for everything, but especially if you want a little bit more of a hand holding for your cables. So that is what I'm wearing today. Let us go ahead and dive into all of the whips we have on the needles. The first whip that I'm going to talk about is the one that has been on the needles the longest. And I actually downloaded a count up instead of like a countdown timer, counter upper on my iPad. And I was able to put in the start dates for my project. So every week prior to this, I've just been doing the mental math of trying to figure out how many days I've been working on something. And this project, well, and now I have it all in this app. And so I definitely recommend that if you're someone who likes to keep track of how long you've had something on the needles. And I have the little widget set on my home screen so that I could just take a peek and say, all right, it's time to get working on that one. So we are officially on day 104 of this whip, which is my Korshavn cardigan by Tanya Hodney. And it is just a really simple silhouette of a V-neck cardigan that has this really beautiful basket weave texture on it. As I'm trying to get better at managing the amount of whips that I have on the needles at any given time, I found myself getting pretty overwhelmed with having this as an ongoing whip. So I decided to give myself some parameters and just something to aim for so that it wouldn't feel as overwhelming. And so basically I've decided that the goal is to knit one of the basket weaves a day, and I am onto the sleeves. So I've been sort of doing that, but it's also been liberating that there have been days where I just sat down and got 3 of the basket weaves done. And then the next day I thought, well, I did that yesterday. I didn't really have to get to it today. So honestly, it was just the idea of like not feeling like, oh my gosh, you have to finish that project. Instead, just get a basket weave done. It'll get done when it gets done. It's a staple piece for your wardrobe. It doesn't matter how long it takes. So highly recommend that system if you have a whip that has just been ongoing and has been taunting you from the needles. Just liberate yourself a little bit and set a smaller goal of, the 20 minutes a day or 30 minutes a day, or a basket weave a day, or if you're doing stripes, a stripe a day, something like that, to just make everything a little bit more manageable and little bite-sized pieces as you go. And I mentioned in my last podcast that I am considering modifying the pattern slightly so that the sleeves have more of a straight taper to them rather than the sort of balloon sleeve that they have in the pattern. And so as I said I was going to do, I did just pick up the other sleeve and start working on that while I kind of mull over my options for how I'm going to do the tapered sleeves. As of now, I think my plan is to knit the sleeves so that they do come down to the elbow, and then basically just I'm gonna look at how many decreases I'm supposed to have at the cuff and evenly divide it between the rows that I have for the rest of the sleeve. So essentially, I'm imagining that that basket weave pattern is going to start kind of turning in on itself as it sort of like eats away some of the basket weave. But I think as long as I'm tidy about it, that won't bother me too much. And I do just feel like it's worth it to have a little bit more of a streamlined look for this particular cardigan. That being said, too, I think that with the ribbing on the cuffs of the sleeve, I'm going to try and match the width of the ribbing that I have on the hem of the cardigan because I believe that the pattern only has about an inch or an inch and a half of ribbing at the cuff of the sleeves. So I think with doing more of a taper, it would look nice to have a little bit longer of a width of ribbing. So that's something that I am considering doing too. If I didn't mention it already, the yarn I'm using for this one is the Fisherman's Wool, Lion Brand Fisherman's Wool in the colorway Oatmeal. It's 100% wool. You can pick it up at the big box stores on Amazon, super budget friendly, and I've really been enjoying working with it. So, really not much too much to say. Not much to say about this one. It is still going and we're still just working on a row or a basket weave a day. So that is my Core 7 cardigan by Tanya Hodney. Again, that's been on the needles for 104 days as of today. Moving on to the whip that has made the most progress since the last time we spoke, and the one that you have seen already, and that is what I'm calling my Thanksgiving vest or my Thanksgiving Day vest. And it is using the pattern pretty loosely, the So Frill Blouse by Nadine Jouareg-Falvel. And this is a blouse pattern that does have sleeves. However, I am taking the parts of this pattern that I really love and doing my best to make a vest out of it. Essentially, right now, let's see where we're at. When we spoke last, I said that my goal was to get this to knitting in the round before we met again. And here we are in the round, and we've even made a little bit more progress than that. Since we last spoke, I did pick up and knit the collar and the button bands or the button placket, the buttonless button placket that are on this knit. So the way that this one is constructed is you knit the back panel, then you pick up for the front pieces, and before you can join the front two panels together, you have to go back and do the sort of collar ribbing, and then you knit individually these buttonless button plackets, at which point you then overlay one onto the other and then pick up those stitches and knit in the round. The size range on this pattern is kind of limited, and before I was able to connect the pieces in the round under the arms, I was having some doubts on the way that it was going to fit because I don't want this to have negative ease, and the pattern really only suggests having a couple of inches of positive ease. I also had to take into consideration the fact that I'm planning to wear a blouse underneath this. So really, I didn't want the underarm to sit up too high, but also as a vest, you don't really want it to sit so low. And it is kind of tricky to gauge how deep that armhole is. I think that if I were to do this again, or if I was having these concerns again, if you're ever having these concerns with getting to that point where you're knitting from the back and front panel to then connecting under the arm, and you can't quite figure out if you're there yet, I would suggest putting all of your panels on try-it-on tubing and then trying it on that way. Because basically what I was trying to do was put it over my head and then having my boyfriend like hold the back down while I held the front down to see if it would kind of reach under my arm where I wanted it to. But the issue with that is that you kind of don't take into consideration the fact that you're also most likely going to be picking up stitches or casting on stitches between that front and back panel. So while the depth of the actual yoke might be coming under my arm, I couldn't quite figure out how much additional space I was going to need from front to back to that panel. So that just the distance of the underarm part. And so I was juggling with that, like, I was struggling with that. I didn't come up with the idea of putting on the try-it-on tubing and just connecting it all to see how that would work out. And so what I did instead was my sort of method of trying it on and trying to pull it, and it just didn't seem like the armhole was gonna be deep enough, nor did it seem like this was gonna be quite wide enough to cover my full bust circumference. So I started measuring things flat and laying it against pieces that I like the fit of. And I wound up doing some math that led me to add more increases. So typically when you're working something top down, you are doing increases, which is of course making the project longer. It's working from the shoulder down to the hem. But also a lot of the time you're adding increases on the side so that you're getting a wider and wider fabric until you reach your widest point around your bust. And I basically got to the point where the pattern said for the largest size in the pattern to stop and connect in the round, and I wasn't trusting the process. So I went ahead and added an additional 5 rows of increases on each of the front panels as well as the back panel. So that gave me not only additional length, but also more width everywhere. I measured it again and was again putting it on and kind of tugging things around to see how it would look. And I also decided to double the amount of stitches that the pattern suggests you cast on under the arm. So at this point, I added quite a bit of length and width, and you just don't realize that when you're doing it. Seems so incremental until you realize, like, well, no, that's actually, if my gauge is right, I think I've gone ahead and added something like, what was it at that point? Like 10, 20, 35. So I kind of just went and added something like 2 inches to the whole bust circumference, but also in the depth of the armhole. And I do feel like I overcompensated a little bit. I'm not mad about it because my whole intention with this vest is to play around and do things like that, which I wouldn't normally do if I thought I wanted this to be my new favorite everyday vest. Being that my intention for this vest is simply to have something festive to wear on Thanksgiving, I didn't feel like I had to be too careful about the choices I made in the actual making process. So I've given myself the liberty of just playing around and messing things up and not minding it too much, because if you're only going to wear it really one day, well, I'm guaranteeing that I'm going to wear this for one day. And that's really all I want to get out of it. I'm not too bothered by the fact that it's probably a little bit wider and there's probably a little bit more room in the armhole depth than I would have loved. Now I know all is good. I am shocked at the fact that the variegation is still going surprisingly well. If you want to know more about exactly how I managed the hand-dyed yarn in this project, I 100% recommend checking out my last podcast episode where I completely broke it down with a diagram because it was really confusing to explain. So I'm shocked that it's actually going well, because I was nervous that going from working flat and then to in the round, I was terrified that there was going to be a lot of variation in the way that the colors did pool together. And I'm pleasantly surprised. I think that if you're a knitter, you know that there's a little bit of a discrepancy there where it gets a little more of a regular striping starts to happen once I'm knitting in the round in that wider circumference. But it is not enough for me to be upset about. I'm pleasantly surprised. I'm impressed with how this has been going. So I cannot be mad at this project. And essentially, I also realized while I was editing the last podcast, I remember seeing in the pattern, it said, this is the chart, the cable chart. And I was like, that's weird. There's no cables in this. That must have been, I was like, that's a typo. So I assumed that there was just a random cable chart, like I thought maybe with like the stitch abbreviations and stuff, it was just saying like, if there's a cable chart in this pattern, here's how to read it, which was a silly assumption. And then I was thinking about it some more and I was like, what is that cable chart about? And then I looked a little closer at the pattern and I realized that the original pattern has what I've been referring to as this ribbing in the torso of the blouse. And it's actually these little tiny cables, which is a lovely touch that I have absolutely no intention of adding to my vest. Because I'm on a deadline and I want this to be done for Thanksgiving and there's so much variegation, and even in the pattern photos, I thought it was ribbing. I'm just going to go ahead and do ribbing. I also, because I'm not knitting this how the pattern would suggest and how the project photos are, where you have that really cinched in waist where that cable detail is adding a little more of that feminine flair. I really am just knitting this because I liked everything that was happening from the shoulders up or from the bust up. I liked all of this. And like the rest of it, I could do without. So I still do plan to knit this down to my natural waist, at which point I'm going to split for the front and back and just knit ribbing. I might do 2x2 for the fun of it, but it might just be 1x1 ribbing. I might continue because the button placket and all of this business is a partial twisted rib. So maybe I'll just keep doing that because I actually didn't mind that so much. There's a chance that they will be both the same length in the front and the back, or I might do the back a little bit longer, like a lot of split hem patterns that you see. Haven't totally decided yet, but I'm really trying to keep this super simple so that it's just an experiment, mindless, kind of silly knitting. And so the only other thing that I'm now at a crossroads with is I did see in the pattern, she does have information at the bottom of the pattern for ways that you might choose to modify it. And one of those ways was to ditch the sleeves. And she pretty much just said like, knit the pattern and don't knit the sleeves. And that's that. But that would leave me with a raw hem on the armholes. And because mine is so gapingly large, I do feel like I need to resolve it a little bit. However, the actual width that I'm getting with the vest right now, so the distance that it comes out onto my shoulders, is really where I want it to be. So I don't want to add a significant bit more. Plus, if I'm going to have my ruffly frilly sleeves, I really don't want like anything. I don't want anything on the armhole, but I kind of have to just because of the way that I chose to modify the pattern and kind of screwed up that armhole depth a little bit. So I'm torn. The two things that I'm thinking is I think that maybe an I-cord bind off would help to sort of just cinch that hole up a little bit and tighten up the armhole a little so that it's not quite as long and gaping. Or I might just do a few rows of stockinette and let it curl. I'm also considering doing basically like the setup rows, pick up all the stitches, and then do a couple the setup rows for a tubular bind off and then just go straight into the bind off. So something that's going to be a very narrow but finished and clean hem The other option would be, of course, to continue the twisted rib, but I think if I'm going to do that, I have to match the sort of depth of the twisted rib on the button placket and the other little detail areas, at which point I'd be adding basically an inch of additional fabric to the shoulders, and I didn't really want to do that. So those are sort of the ideas that I'm toying with right now. I haven't decided on any one. Hopefully I will have picked something before the next time we talk. And yeah, that's pretty much where we're at with this one. I wish that this project was a little bit more portable. It's only been tricky because I am essentially managing 4 balls of yarn because I am helical knitting in the round. And since I joined in the round, I did just pull out 2 balls of mohair. So I have 1 skein of hand-dyed yarn with 1 ball of mohair, and then a second skein of hand-dyed yarn with a second ball of mohair that I'm helical knitting. So there's a lot of twisting and tangling. And so it hasn't been great for just taking out of the house and knitting because I need space for all of those things to not get twisted and tangled. But other than that, I'm very pleased. I've been leaving it by the couch. I've been leaving it by the bed. It's easy to do at home. And I really just let me show you what the yarn is doing. I literally have the yarn living in just Ziploc gallon bags that were easy enough to grab because I'm not a project bag girly. I don't have project bags laying around. So this is the easiest thing I could do to just be able to kind of like flip-flop these as they're getting twisted and tangled in the process of the helical knitting. And that is working out just fine. So that is where we're at with this one. I also forgot to mention, and I thought that this was really comical. My needles are my wooden interchangeable set from, they're the Knit Picks wooden needles, and they're in this green colorway. And then I have this orange cable on them. And so the whole thing is actually very aesthetic together, which of course was not intentional, but does bring an extra level of satisfaction to the project. So this is my So Frill blouse by Nadine Jouareg Balbel, and it is what I am lovingly calling my Thanksgiving vest. And this project has now been on the needles for 11 days. And I feel like for 11 days, we've made great progress, especially considering the fact that this is being worked on 4.5mm needles. So not like huge, but not teeny tiny. So I'm excited about it. I still have to find a white blouse to put under this because I realized I didn't really want something with a collar. I'm thinking either something that has like one of those, a little bow tie in the front to kind of come through the button placket, or just something super, super simple. So I'm going to find just a crisp white blouse to wear under this. And yeah, we'll see how this goes. Hopefully it's done for Thanksgiving. Okay, and last up in the way of whips is a brand new cast on that you guys have not yet seen. Now, if you were able to catch my winter knitting plans video that I posted this week, then you already know that I am knitting myself a dress for Christmas. And yeah, I don't have a lot of time to do that in, but essentially, I saw this pattern, I mean, way at the beginning of my knitting career. And it is the Augustine's number 25. Beautiful dress. It's an interesting pattern in that the product, I feel like I don't want to be someone who's constantly modifying patterns, but it's just sort of been how things are going lately. So I hope you'll bear with me on that. But I really loved the way that Vilma of Sage Knits and Things had done her dress. And it's really minor modifications, just in the fact that the bust sort of section is actually knit like an empire waist dress. When I had originally seen this pattern, I did see it on a hanger and I pictured this empire waist dress. And then I saw that it's actually supposed to fit a little bit more, think like Bridgerton. I guess, no, that is like that empire waist dress. I don't know. It's just not exactly what I had pictured when I saw it on the hanger. So when I saw the way that Vilma of Sage Knits and Things had knit her version, that was the one that I fell in love with and bought the pattern, bought the yarn. And I've just been really excited. I had this vision of Christmas dress as soon as I saw it. So I actually reached out to Vilma, which if you're watching, thanks for being here. And thank you so much for your advice. I wanted to just know when she was modifying the pattern, if there were any little roadblocks that she ran into. And she did give me some great advice. And so I am working with the advice that she gave me, as well as just my own desires for this pattern. And I also realized that I purchased the yarn back over the summer. And at the time, I was just so conscious of the fact that this was going to be a lot of yarn. And while the pattern suggests that you have 3 strands of yarn so that you're holding 1 main yarn and then 2 strands of mohair for the majority of the dress, there are then times where you're to hold the 1 main strand and then a single strand of mohair. And that's how some of the sort of finishes and details and edges are done. It was going to just be insane for me to knit this dress with 3 strands of yarn for the majority of it in mohair, even using the drops yarn. It was going to make it just not a budget-friendly option, considering the fact that it's not going to get a ton of wear. It's not an everyday piece. It's going to be a party dress, a statement dress. And so what I kind of decided to do back in the summer when I ordered it and then forgot that I had done this and then looked at my yarn and was like, what the heck was I thinking? I decided to just go with the main strand of yarn and then a single strand of the drops brushed alpaca instead of 2 strands of mohair. And I figured I would just address the gauge issues when I got there. We've got a saga, guys. So I knew I was coming into this with the wrong materials. And then something that I didn't realize was I glanced at the pattern. I bought the pattern, but what I didn't put together was how open the gauge was. And if you look at the sample version, her dress is knit in a very light and neutral color that's pretty similar to her skin tone. And so you actually can't see that the stitches are crazy open. And I think it works if you're going to wear like a slip underneath it and have a very similar color to your skin tone, then that totally works. But with my red, did I mention I was going to be red? With my red version, those holes, I felt like we were just going to be too much going on. Not to mention the fact that I did my gauge swatch with the recommended needle size, and I was shocked. This is my swatch that I did, which I did in a similar way to the way I did my swatch for my ranunculus, which is totally not the way you're supposed to do things, but it's this or nothing. So this is better than nothing, I think. I basically started with the recommended needle size and then kind of worked my way down through different needle sizes I thought I might want to use instead. And so, all right, so the recommended needle size, and I'm just going to refer to the majority of the dress because that's what I'm going to do. So you're supposed to knit this on an 8mm needles. When I read the pattern, I assumed that I've never used 8mm needles. I saw the number 8 and assumed US 8 being a 5mm needle. So when I saw 8mm, I literally read it 3 times. I was like, maybe I'm wrong. Like maybe I got the wrong pattern. 8mm needle is huge. It's huge. And I'm working with a strand of fingering weight yarn and then a strand of the brushed alpaca. And even if I had the yarn that was suggested in the pattern, it's around the same bulkiness. So the 8mm needle, I mean, I could see there's a lot that could be seen through that. And in general, I just don't love the fabric that I was getting, nor did I love holding the 8mm needles. I think I'm someone who, with the bigger needles, it's uncomfortable for me. I don't enjoy it as much. And while I see the benefits of, especially something like this midi length dress, I see the benefits of wanting a bigger needle, but it's just straight up uncomfortable for me. So I tried that out and said no. Vilma said that she also dropped her needle size and adjusted the gauge because it was also open. And that information is in her Ravelry page too. So I then dropped down in the next section of my swatch to using a 6.5 millimeter needle. So I went from an 8 millimeter to a 6.5 millimeter needle. And while I do feel like that is significantly better, it is still just a little bit more open than I was hoping for. Then I dropped down to a 6 millimeter needle and finished out the swatch with a 4 millimeter needle. Ultimately, where the pattern suggests that you use a 5 millimeter needle, I am using a 4 millimeter needle. And where the pattern suggests using an 8 millimeter needle, I'm using a 6 millimeter needle. And that left me with more math to do. You'd think I like doing math. I don't. Thank goodness for boyfriend because he likes doing math. So he helped me figure this out. And long story short, I will be knitting the size 5 for the top portion of this dress. And for the bottom portion of the dress, I'm knitting the size 6. And that should give me my desired fit. And the biggest bit of math that I had to do was just calculate the rate at which I'm actually going to increase between those two sections. Unfortunately, it already was set up in such a way that you would knit your bust portion at sort of a negative ease and then increase stitches to start the whole skirt. So it actually wasn't as involved. It was just kind of really tricky to figure out basically the ratios and percentages that I was getting gauge. It was a whole thing, but I think that we figured it out and I'm pretty pleased with the route that I'm taking. So I will be following the pattern. I'll just be following the pattern for a slightly bigger size than what I would have knit if I had gauge. I also made the executive decision when I made the swatch to steam block it because I figured no matter what, the gauge was winding up more wholly than what I had in my head. And once this was knit into such a big, just dress garment, I didn't really want to soak it and then have the weight of it to distort it too much and open up those holes even more. So I did decide to steam block my swatch and I am going to steam block the dress once it's done rather than soak it and let it completely stretch out. After we did all this math, after I did my swatch, it was time to cast on. And this project has now evicted the Thanksgiving vest from the bucket bag, and it is living in here at the moment. This is the most underwhelming whip you've ever seen. Wow! Look at all the progress. So it's going to take me a little bit to get through the bust portion because I am knitting this at a little bit more of a dense gauge because it is going to be a double layer of fabric and I didn't want holes in it. No matter what, I am going to have to wear something underneath this and that's fine with me. I actually don't mind having to do that. I don't mind having to wear a slip or something underneath. I just didn't realize quite how holey the actual original was, particularly in this skirt. So I just really wanted to have a good dense fabric for the bust, especially because it's going to wind up being a really heavy dress. And so I want to make sure that I have a good amount of structure and just that density in the bust and the shoulders to hopefully carry the weight of the rest of the dress. But I do think it's going to wind up really being just beautiful. I just hope that I can actually get it done in time because I think I'm not I knit my all good dress on 3 millimeter needles in exactly 2 months. And this dress is not going to be quite as long as that one was. It is knit on, now I am using 6mm needles for this one. However, it does have all of the texture, whereas that dress was completely stockinette all over. So I think that it's a good kind of reference that this should take me about 2 months to make. And I am less than 2 months away from Christmas. So, worst case scenario, I have 2 options. Either I shorten the length of it and it's just a shorter dress for Christmas, or I keep going past Christmas and let it be a Valentine's Day dress. I think I'm okay with either one of those options, and I'll just have to see kind of how it's going and what it's telling me as I go. But that's pretty exciting. So I've really done minimal work on this. However, I was pretty excited to get this going because it is going to be worked stockinette in the round for the whole bust area. It's very simple up top. And because of the kind of hassle I've had with the mohair and the hand-dyed yarn in my Thanksgiving vest project, I decided to just ball up or cake up the 2 yarns together. I probably won't do that again with the rest of them, only because I ran out of yardage in the brushed alpaca before I ran out in I'm using Drops brushed alpaca and Drops Fabelle for both of the 2 different yarns. So I ran out of the yardage in the brushed alpaca before the Fabelle. Therefore, I have some left over in the Fabelle that I'm going to have to incorporate into another ball of brushed alpaca. And so I'll cross that bridge when I get there. But for now, this just made it so much easier since I have another project that I'm dealing with just a lot of yarn management issues. The only other thing is, while this is stockinette in the round and therefore super simple, and I'm comfortable not looking at my work when it's stockinette in the round, I think that the brushed alpaca is, it's, if I had to choose right now between the brushed alpaca and the kid silk mohair, since they are both Drops yarn, I would go with the mohair because of the sort of like softness and lightness. But more than that, it's the way that the fibers come off of the core of the yarn in a really straight and elongated way. The brushed alpaca has, it looks cheaper. It looks like ratty mohair. Does that mean? I don't mind the way that it looks knit up necessarily, but I do kind of feel like the look of it is as if it's been overworn or overworked or something, which is just interesting. It is soft, but it's just interesting. And because of that, basically when you're knitting it, it kind of wants to stick to itself. So the stitches on the actual needle are kind of getting stuck together. And also because the way that the fibers around the core are a little more like squished and scrunched, it's kind of hard to separate and find the core when you're not looking at your work and you're trying to just get the tip of the needle back behind the yarn. I don't know, is a little bit of a different experience. That's okay. But if I had to pick one to work with again for just like simple knitting in the round right now, based off of working the yarns, I would choose a mohair instead of the brushed alpaca from Drops. This is Drops specifically. And that's just how I feel right now. What's interesting though is that I also have the Drops brushed alpaca in a different colorway, and just the ball feels totally different than this one does. So I don't know if that is just, I've heard that when sometimes with dyed yarns, really saturated colors, they kind of change the texture of the yarn, and that makes sense to me. So maybe that's what it is, but I'm just not obsessed with the feeling of this yarn, neither in my hands. It almost makes my hands like sweat. Is this TMI? I feel like my hands are sweating. And I just feel like I'm fighting through a little bit more of like a carpet, whereas the mohair is just so light and airy. I know that there's a difference in the fibers. I'm just saying, if you're someone who is sensitive to mohair and was considering the brushed alpaca, I just think that you should keep that in mind before you think that that's an even swap. That's all. That's all. So those are my whips for this week. Doesn't seem like anything too exciting, but I'm hoping that things will get a little bit more interesting before next week. So I don't have any acquisitions. I've been out at the thrift stores, but it's so hit or miss. So now you get to see that real time. Sometimes I just get hit after hit, and then other times it's just absolutely nothing at all. So we're in a little bit of a drought in the thrifting yarn department. So no acquisitions for me. I think that my plans for the next week are going to be continue like I have been, a basket weave a day on Corsavin. On my Thanksgiving vest, I would really love it if I could be into the hem, ribbing, whatever that's going on there. And well, when is Thanksgiving? Oh man, we're already a week away from Thanksgiving. So really, this thing needs to be done. Okay, new plan, regroup. With the time remaining between now and Thanksgiving, I need to prioritize my Thanksgiving vest, and definitely will need to have the whole body done by the next time I talk to you. And that should give me, I think if I have a day to do the frills and any finishes, that would be enough for me. So that's going to be the plan for the Thanksgiving vest. This will be interesting to see if I could get it done. And this also means that I have zero confidence in my Christmas dress getting done before Christmas. How are we already halfway through November, guys? Like, when did that happen? Oh, wow. So I will be mostly prioritizing the Thanksgiving vest between now and then, and I will be working on the Christmas dress as more of my out and about, sort of on the go knitting, since it is a little more simple to manage. So those are the plans for the next week. I do have plans to get a second video out this coming week, and it's going to be a good one. So definitely keep an eye out for that. And otherwise, you guys, that's all I have for you today. I hope that you are working on something that you're loving. I love knitting vicariously through you. So definitely let me know what you're working on down in the comments. It looks like that's all I have for you guys this week. If you want to stay in touch with me a little bit more, you can definitely follow me over on Instagram at akanoraknits. And if you liked what you saw today, definitely please consider giving this video a like and subscribe, ring the bell, all those things that YouTube likes. Otherwise, big ol' thanks for watching, and I will see you guys on the next one. Okay, bye!